Hi, and welcome to Booknote. I'm Rihanna Nelson, your host for this week's edition of Booknote podcast. We're interviewing Ned Hayes, who previously appeared on our show back in August with his novel Coeur d'Alene Waters, and this week he's here with his new novel, Sinful Folk. Welcome, Ned.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks for arranging this talk.
So this story is set deep in the Middle Ages, in the 14th century. That's an interesting and unique choice. Why choose that era for the setting of your novel?
I didn't know I'd be writing this kind of a story when I started. I started when I was studying Chaucer and medieval literature in graduate school, and I knew about this story of villagers who had traveled across England with the bodies of their children, and I wrote an initial page that showed somebody lighting that fire, and then it sat on ice for about 10 years. And all I knew was that someone murdered them, and that person had a lot of vengeance in their heart.
So then you told a completely different story about a woman disguised as a man, mute, for 10 years, scared that she had lost her son in one of these fires.
Right.
How did you come to tell Mir's or Miriam's story?
Well, at first I didn't know that I'd be telling her story at all. I didn't know she existed. The pages I'd written had just been sitting on a shelf. And then I came back to them and I picked it up and I thought, what would happen if a woman woke up at night and her son was missing? What would she do? And as I described her getting ready to go out and find the fire and try to find her lost son, I realized that she was mute and that everyone in the village knew her as a man. And I did not know that about her when I started writing. Alice Walker talks about channeling the spirits of the past, that she almost feels like she's hearing the voice of a ghost speaking through her. And for the first time in writing a novel, I felt that way too. I felt like I was bringing to light a true story that was Mir's story that had never been told before, hidden for hundreds of years.
That's incredible. And then there's the journey itself.
Right. Well, the interesting thing about this journey is that most villagers in England never traveled more than about 10, 20 miles from where they were born. I mean, it takes you a day and a half to walk 20 miles, especially carrying a load. And so the medieval text tells us that they traveled all the way to London, which in that day and age was like going to the moon, like traveling for weeks all the way across England to present the bodies of their children to the king. So I wondered what that journey must have been like, and what if the person who murdered them was on that journey with them. So I gave Mir the task of uncovering, or maybe she gave me the task of telling her story, of uncovering the murderer and uncovering the mystery of why they were killed.
So we've heard some of the novel. Why don't you pick your favorite passage to share with our audience on Booknote?
Sure.
Something that's meaningful for you.
Great. How about this? In the end, I listen to my fear. It keeps me awake, resounding through the frantic beating in my breast. It is there in the dry tear in my throat, in the pricking of the rat's nervous feet in the darkness. Christian has not come home all the night long. I know, for I have lain in this darkness for hours now, with my eyes stretched wide, yearning for my son's return. Each night he works late. I cannot sleep. I am tormented when he is not here. I fear he will never return. I lie awake, plagued by my own fears of loss. But my fears have never come to pass yet. So on this night, I tell myself that the sound I hear is frost cracking, river ice breaking. I lie to my own heart as one lies to a frightened child, one who cannot be saved. For all the while, I know it is a fire, and I
was also admiring this beautiful illustration. Very simple, but stark, black and white. Now, this was drawn by Nikki McClure, which is also a best-selling author. And now, how did that come to pass? She read your book, was so impressed, and she wanted to illustrate something for
Well,
it?
so Nikki, if you look at the cover, actually cuts this out in black paper with an X-Acto blade.
So this is actually a cutting. It's
right.
not even a drawing. It's
right.
Oh my gosh.
It's a paper cut. So all that intricate work is done. It is done with an X-Acto blade, and she's a well-known Northwest artist. And she read an earlier draft of the novel, created this wonderful cover, and then as I revised the novel at the behest of my editor, I kept being inspired by her work. And Nikki also contributed 7 internal illustrations in the novel. So you can see her work not only on the cover, but throughout the book. And I'm just blessed to be inspired by Nikki.
Wow, that's really incredible to have this beautiful collaboration between writer and illustrator, and just that beautiful harmony of working together. That brings to mind another question I love to ask on Booknote. Who are your other inspirations? Writers, authors?
Well, I love handicrafts, which is why I really enjoyed working with Nikki, because it's by hand all the way. But other writers who have inspired me include Geraldine Brooks, Anita Diamant, Zadie Smith, and of course Ursula Le Guin, that great Northwest author.
So your list is interesting. All amazing writers, but frankly all female writers. What inspires you about the female voice, and how does that affect the way that you write?
Well, frankly, Neil Gaiman said it best when he said, being asked to choose your favorite author or your favorite book is kind of like being asked which one of your limbs is the one that you can't live without. So I have favorite authors across every genre. But when I wrote Sinful Folk, I really looked to the female voice to drive the text, because it's Mir's story. It's not my story. It's her tale that is coming through. And I wanted to be authentic to her experience. So it was really important to me to get her experience of motherhood, of birth, of love and loss, to get that voice right and to be authentic to her experience. And frankly, I get a little tired of the great American novelist being a man who needs to tell, male stories, whether that's Philip Roth or John Updike. I'd like to think that stories about women, like the stories that Jane Austen told, can be just as powerful and can be the great novels that we look to for our life's inspiration.
Well, as a woman, I can definitely relate to that, and I think that will be appreciated by the readers who really want that authenticity. Something else that I wonder about is that gender boundary. There's a scene where there are men searching for her and talking about her.
Right, and they don't know that she's there.
Right, and they haven't seen her for 10 years. And they're describing her as this frail, delicate
feminine. So by having Mir live as a man for 10 years, I kind of had my cake and I got to eat it too, because she's both a woman and a man, kind of like that famous book by Virginia Woolf about a woman who changes her gender. In this one, she's actually fully a woman the whole time, just the men don't know it, which I think is often the case. I think in many societies, we end up seeing what we want to see in other people. And that scene when Mir is surrounded by men talking about her, where they look right past her, is symptomatic of that moment in culture, that we all see what we want to see in other people. So, to your point about that scene, there's this man who has been hunting for her for 10 years. And he thinks that he's hunting for some frail flower from the royal court who's wealthy, who's not very strong, who's not a powerful person. And yet Mir is sitting there, a very strong person. Yes, she's ferocious. And she later punches that same guy in the face. And so I love the moment where she's evaluating what they're saying about her and showing how wrong they are. And all the way through the novel, I love her perspective. She's mute, and so she doesn't talk at all, almost, until near the end. And yet she doesn't miss anything. She sees everything.
That's fascinating to have that observant quality and never voice it.
Right.
How do you feel she does voice herself if she can't speak?
Well, I had to be really creative, or I guess I should say that Mir is really creative, because she's able to communicate with the people around her by gesture, by pulling people in different directions, and eventually her voice does come out, and she refines it. And what's interesting about that scene is that her voice, when she finds it, isn't even in English. The first words that she speaks in the novel are in French.
So as I remember from reading Chaucer, the women in his tales are also very strong.
Right, and Chaucer was another inspiration. I read Chaucer over and over as I wrote this book, and really jumped off from his tales in here. My characters tell various stories that are in Chaucer that I think were part of the common parlance then. And I even lift very specific passages from Chaucer and use them in service of my own story. In fact, I marked a passage for you that's straight from Chaucer.
I want to make sure that we touch on that. Some lovely language from Ned Hayes and Chaucer. April comes to us with her showers sweet. I wake to the cries of little birds before the light comes across the heath. They wait all night with open eyes. Now, with the rain at dawn, their voices make melody. I turn back the reveled cloth of gold on my bed and walk to gaze beyond my glazed casement window. In the plaintive voices of the woodfowl, I imagine my mother calling to me, her words echoing across the years. My heart is restless, though I live in comfort, cosseted in the manor house of Ashcroft. I wrap myself in a Moorish robe of intricate design and gaze beyond my solitary window. This glass is only my latest affectation of luxury. Raindrops speckle the costly glass as darkness lifts from the horizon. Every night, I slip into the empty winter land of memory.
Well, I'm glad that you ended there, because
I
the
don't
rest
give
of it
too much away.
right. But I guess that's enough to tell the readers that Mir does survive and thrive and actually become wealthy. So she does make it through that terrible journey intact.
So it was a happy ending then to a great read.
Oh, thank you.
You know, as I read Sinful Folk, I made a list of some other great reads. I think this book would really appeal to readers of Geraldine Brooks' Year of Wonders, as well as Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, and of course the fabulous The Red Tent by Anita Diamant.
Wow, thank you.
Yes, I think those are fabulous books, and I know that readers will really enjoy Sinful Folk. So thank you for sitting down with me today, Ned, and thank you for sharing.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy reading.
Yes, absolutely. So here it is. This is Sinful Folk by Ned Hayes. Hi, I'm Rihanna Nelson. Writing his book. Sorry. I'm Rihanna Nelson, your host for this week's Booknote podcast.